So again, welcome everyone. Using human resources to support organizational health and resilience. My name is Daniela Labate-Cavelli. I am from NIAPERS, and NIAPERS is one of the MCTAC partners. I'm joined today by my colleague, Eve Addis. This is where you wave at everyone, Eve.
All right, well, I can't see myself. Can you see me?
We can, yes.
Okay, so hello. Okay.
Okay. And today's offering has been put together by not only the folks over at NIAPERS, but also our other partners from the coalition, Marlo Passion, who also happens to be in the room with us today. So shout out to you, Marlo, and also John Coppola from ASAP. So again, just a little bit of housekeeping. The slides will be posted on the MCTAC or CTAC website, as well as the recording. If you have any technical questions, feel free to chat, or if you're having any technical difficulties, feel free to chat those into the chat box to all panelists so that we can help you out. We do have some technical support. Tara from MCTAC is in the background helping us out, so we appreciate that. And if you're new to MCTAC, MCTAC is a training, consultation, and educational resource center that offers resources to all behavioral health, mental health, and substance use disorder providers throughout the state. And our overall goal is to prepare and assist providers with the transition to Medicaid managed care. And this slide just shows you all of the CTAC and MCTAC partners that were involved in the development of the training today, or the offering today. And you'll notice ICL is also on the list, and that's because today's offering is really an extension of the Workforce Priorities webinar series that ICL has been putting together and has been executing. So we hope that you've been involved in those. If you haven't, we certainly do have a resource at the end. There's a link that you can access all of the recorded webinars and the pre-recorded offerings from the Workforce Priorities webinar series. Okay, so some learning objectives. We hope a few things for you today. One is that after today, you'll have a broader self-awareness of your own organization's culture. We're going to be spending a lot of time today talking about organizational culture and the importance of health and resilience around organizational culture. We hope that you'll be able to identify at least one thing for you to work on or to begin to address as part of addressing your organization's culture. And also to think about how you can be better prepared to face any external factors that contribute to your organization's culture. So because we're in a little bit different of a platform today, we're going to do things just a little bit differently. You know, Eve and I like to travel rest of state, and if we could, we would be with you right now, probably at the Buffalo Library or the Batavia Library, and be in person and spending a few hours together. But unfortunately, we're not able to do that. So we're using Zoom as a platform to have this meeting today. You do have the ability to unmute your phones, and we appreciate it if you could or would want to join the conversation. If you could unmute your phones, in order to do that, you would just hover over the lower left-hand bottom of your screen, and you'll see either a microphone or a telephone receiver, depending on how you've dialed into the meeting. And just click that, and you can mute and unmute yourself to speak. We ask that you use the chat box to comment or make any, or ask any questions. Feel free to do that. We'll be monitoring the chat box throughout. Just also, because we do have, like, how many people do we have? About 20-something folks in the room today. We just ask that you try to minimize distractions by muting yourself when you're not speaking. All right, so if we were in a group, we would ask you to kind of go around the room and say who you are and where you're from and that kind of thing. I feel like that'll take us a little bit of time in this virtual platform. So let's use the chat box. If you could, just chat into us, who you are, where you're from, what your role is. We're trying to get an idea of who's in the room. If we have any HR people in the room, we'd like to know that. If we have anyone that has a dual role like CEO, COO, and HR, let us know who's in the room with us. So take a minute just to type that into the chat box if you like. We have a consultant from Compere Rochester. Hello. Restoration Society, always representing of HR generalist. Okay. CFTSS program, vocational services, mental health counselor or consultant, sorry. Director of Supportive Services, Catholic Charities, Executive Director, HR, okay.
Personnel and development, yeah.
Chief Administrative Officer with HR, excellent, great. Director of Personnel, all right, cool, great. So it looks like we have a nice group of HR folks in the room, as well as some other folks that could benefit from what we're going to talk about today. All right, so
Okay.
let's go ahead. Go ahead, Eve, what were you going to say?
No, I'm just I'm still reading. This is good. This is good. We have somebody from an EAP.
Oh, awesome. And we will mention EAPs later today.
Yes.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's start by talking about organizational health. And the way we're going to talk or start the conversation on organizational health is to define organizational health. So Eve, did you want to start us off?
So let me, this is a very dear subject to me because having worked in a lot of organizations, I always had a sense that organizational health was a critical piece of how sustainable organizations are. And I read a quote yesterday that that I just want to read to you now. It's not on the slides, but it's health is how the ship is run, no matter who is at the helm and what waves rock the vessel. I was reading this yesterday, and I thought of the waves that are rocking our vessel these days, and how organizational health is such an important part of being able to overcome the waves that have rocked and are constantly really rocking our vessel, although not as. Okay, I'm sorry
we lost you for a second.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So the measures for health, there are two kinds of measures: static measures and dynamic measures. So of course, the static measures are the financial revenue, how an organization is doing fiscally, the organization's regulatory compliance with regulations, policies, and stakeholder expectations. So this is what auditors come in and do. And of course, you need to have that kind of compliance in order to stay in business. Workforce competence, and that is pretty clear in that if you don't have a workforce that can actually perform the functions that support your mission, that means that you are not able to, you're not healthy as an organization. And then the satisfaction factor, which is, are the people that you are serving satisfied with your services, and is your workforce satisfied with the environment in which it is performing the functions that support your mission? And we do that by, basically the tradition for those is we do annual satisfaction surveys, which you will hopefully understand as we move through this webinar that that's clearly not enough in order to measure the health of an organization. So moving along to dynamic measures, and that is sort of the more complex way and to look at organizational health. So one of them is, are organizational values, missions, and aspirations aligned? So that across the organization, everybody really has bought into the values, understands the mission, and has the same long-term goals, at least insofar as how the organization presents those and communicates them. This next one, which is the capacity for adaptation to change. So this is kind of a Darwinian idea that, the species that survive are the species that can adapt most readily to change. And so how flexible, nimble, and agile is your organization in response to changes that it is faced with. And finally, but last but not least, safety. An organization's health is measured by how safe the people who work in the organization feel. And that is their physical safety, that they're working in a physical environment that feels safe, but also personal and relational safety. Is a person's basically respected in the organization? Is a person who is there feels safe in being able to participate in organizational activities and initiatives? And is the individual safe in the relationships that they have with their colleagues, with their supervisors, and with the across the hierarchy of the organization? So adaptation, safety, and alignment really are those measures that have the potential to derail, and so have to be measured frequently and often. That's a frequently and often. Okay. Okay. So when we look at organizational health in the workplace environment, it includes again the physical space. So how is that organized? Do people feel physically and we're talking about here about, the air quality in the environment, security in the environment, so that people feel that when they come to work or wherever it is that they're performing, that they feel safe. Personal environments is a person comes to work, or a person works in an environment where they are essentially feeling that the place is inclusive, that the place respects their opinions, and that in fact that their opinions and their experience is across the board one that the individual feels that they can contribute, and that they will be respected, and their contributions will be respected, and also how they're treated personally by other people in the workplace. And then specifically in their relationships. So this isn't sort of a general personal safety, but more in the specific relationships they have with supervisors and with people in the organization who have either roles that they interact with, for example, in human resources, where they might relate to someone in human resources, or with the executive team of the organization. So resilience is that factor that I mentioned earlier in that quote. It's being able to respond to the waves that impact the vessel. So we now, because of COVID, have lived experience, all shared lived experience in dealing with something with sudden impact that has, had a tremendous influence on, how we've adapted, or how some organizations have adapted. But there are others. There are budget cuts that organizations are faced with, or things like environmental things, like storms. And a few years ago, we were all hit with Hurricane Sandy in New York City, and that was certainly devastating. There are other kinds of, certainly what's happening in California right now. So all these things that happen suddenly that we have to respond to, and that we have to adapt to, and usually very quickly in order to survive. So that the agility factor comes in here, and a workforce that has the ability to adapt quickly and be nimble in the face of these unforeseen impacts. Decision making is very important part of resiliency, because if an organization is aligned well, then managers can make decisions without having to go up the hierarchy for consensus. Consensus is very good. It's very good at times where things are calm, but in times when you are hit with sudden impact, it's very important that at different levels of the organizations, people are empowered to make decisions. Uh, the time it would take to get a consensus across a hierarchy may be too late. In those instances where there's a need for very quick reaction and very quick action. So the swift action piece is a very important dimension of resilience. And finally, is communication clear, frequent, and transparent. So one of the things that we've seen during COVID is how, because everybody was working virtually, how people had very frequent sort of online Zoom meetings. Usually with the organizations I've worked with, they've had one in the middle of the day and one at the beginning of the day. And so these frequent opportunities to share and get support, and then the communication is very clear, because there's no time here for getting confusing or mixed messages. So clearly during regular times when we're not under a COVID kind of situation, the communication within the organization should still be clear, should still be transparent, and should be frequent. There should be times where people, for obvious reasons, need to get together and share their experience and inform each other in order to get things done. So this is something that I think we're all going to be looking at a little bit differently as we move back to normalcy.
And I just wanted to jump in here for a second. Those last three bullets about how decisions are being made, is the focus on action, quick action, and communication. So they all play a role, a part of resilience, right, which is part of your organization's health. But those actual questions were adapted from something called the Organizational Culture Assessment Questionnaire. And you'll have the link to that questionnaire at the end of the slide. And Tara, if Tara's usually really quick, and she also puts it in the chat box at this point. So if you've got it handy, it'd be great if you could just chat that in for us. If not, no big deal. Oh, there she goes. She's quick. So if you could take a look, it's a great tool. It's a great resource. It's about 2 pages. I think it's 2 pages. It's not very long at all. We suggest taking a look at it, doing it yourself, having others who are in positions, who are decision-making positions at the agency, do it as well. See if your answers align with each other's. Does everybody sort of have the same idea about the culture of your organization? And if not, then that may in fact show some areas that you might want to have to, you might want to take a look at.
And I think all of you kind of probably without, the questionnaire is very good also to start a conversation if you want to start a conversation about this in your organization. But I think that you all have a sense, just intuitively, just by working someplace, whether your organization is resilient. And so the good thing about that questionnaire is that it really, I guess, identifies the dimensions of resilience. And so you can pick apart which ones, as Daniela said, which ones are the ones that you feel your organization would need to pump up.
Right, exactly. So I think this is a good time to sort of stop and check in with folks. If you'd like, you can unmute your phones if you have any questions or comments. You could also use the chat box. But you'll see we're going to sort of do this stopping and checking in and asking questions throughout today, because we want this to be a dynamic conversation amongst all of us and not just the Eve and Daniela show over here.
So do we have any comments, any questions so far? Does this make sense?
Well, that's one question. Does this make sense? And I guess the follow-up question is, have you taken a look at your organization's culture recently? What have you found, if you're willing to share that with us? All right. So the next section is really around HR's role in promoting and supporting health and resilience in an organization. And I love this picture here, because it's sort of like all of the different functions of human resources, in a picture version. looking at folks, at people's potential, at the workforce's potential, having a role in having a leadership role, recruitment, looking at performance, training, all this sort of stuff that we're going to get into. So the first thing,
Daniela, flip back to that, because I have a question of folks. This is sort of the one item there that research, do you guys on the phone, you guys on the Zoom who are human resources folks, what kind of research do you do? If you can just share with us, because I would be interested, because that's sort of a thing that doesn't usually appear in the human resources kind of job description. So what kind of research can you share? I don't have a mic today, but I'm looking forward to sharing this information with executive leadership. Okay.
Great.
What about research, folks? Do you have anything to tell us about, if you're a human resources professional or you do that function for your organization, what kind of research would you be doing?
And I think another way to state that is, what data are you looking at? And what outcomes are you looking for? All right. So first thing is, we expect that your HR person or persons, HR has to be part of the executive team, right? They have to be in a high level decision-making position. And the reason for that is, HR has to be able to recruit, hire, and onboard new staff. Actually, before I go on down the list, I've got a question for you. So we have a bunch of folks in the room who are HR consultants, HR/COOs, CEOs. Anybody in the room also outsource HR? Do you know if your organization outsources HR to a company maybe, or shares HR with another organization? Okay, because if you do, that's okay. And I've certainly worked in places where we've done that, and it's worked out really well. But I think if you're going to outsource HR, it's really imperative to figure out a way to make that HR department part of your team. Getting them on site as far, if you can work on site and you're not working remotely, getting communication, being able to really make sure that folks are present and that people know about your HR. We have somebody chatting in say that they've used
Paychex
HR, but it was not the most effective for the size of our agency.
Right.
Yep, that happens sometimes. And unfortunately, sometimes you just got to try a bunch out before you can figure out what works for you and what doesn't, which is why it's important that your HR person is in a decision-making position, right? So definitely HR is in charge of recruiting, hiring, and onboarding. It's important for communication, internal communication. So let's sort of connect those two, recruiting, hiring, onboarding, and internal communication. Actually, and we're going to connect that with being data-driven as well, right, Eve? So if you are trying to recruit for a position, you've got to be able, as an HR person, you've got to be able to figure out who's needed, right? And Eve, you have a good story about communication and being data-driven and the recruitment. Do you want to share that story? About being the CASAC story? Oh, we've lost Eve. Well, I'll do my best to share Eve's CASAC story with you. So Eve has worked in behavioral health for many years. So one organization he was working at, the issue came up, someone had left the position, they were rehiring, but they happened to notice that the numbers weren't great. People were not always keeping appointments. People were not always showing up when they were supposed to. And they realized that there was an issue, or there was a disconnect between who was coming in the door and who was working with them. So the problem here at that organization, for example, was that there was a therapist working with people who had histories of substance use or who were using and wanted to get help to stop. So the decision was made to recruit a CASAC. Making that decision meant communicating as far as getting information about what was necessary and then making that decision and changing, and then the outcomes were much better. Oh, you're back. Hello, Eve. So I was telling the CASAC story for you.
Okay.
So a little bit more about being data-driven. We really do think, and this goes back to Eve's question about research earlier on in the previous slide, was, we really think that you've got to have data regarding what the outcomes you're looking for are for the people that you're providing services to. And you've got to also have experience of the workforce themselves in order to identify, what people need as far as training and what people need as far as training so that they can have good outcomes. All right. So the next thing we want to talk about is this, what we're calling the consistency between the employee journey and employment. So basically what that means is what you're marketing is your brand and the experience of employment, which is what it's actually like to work there, consistent. And you're going to hear the word consistent a whole lot today from us. So basically, is your staff doing the job that they've been hired to do in the way they were hired to do it? And is their job and their journey consistent with the organization's mission, vision, and values? How do you know that? Is their behavior aligned with the organization's mission? Are people happy to come to work? What's their experience of work, right? Are people complaining about the job that they've not been hired to do? Sometimes that's kind of how we see the disconnect. People, the workforce starts to complain about, this isn't what I was hired to do. And it's because the employee journey and the employment is inconsistent, and there's a disconnect there. Transparency and supervision and workforce management and actually all of these really go together. All the bullets from both slides go together, but supervision is really important. Someone should not find out that there's an issue on their annual performance evaluation. That shouldn't be the first time that people find out that there's an issue. We should be working with our staff all the time. We should be helping them throughout supervision. We should be asking for feedback, and we should be making sure that they have all the tools that they need to do the job in the way we expect them to do it. Let's talk about the current, workforce situation. Different parts of the state obviously have different experiences of COVID. What happened when people had to start working remotely? Did they have the technology that they needed to start working remotely? What kinds of things could we offer our workforce so that they could do their job effectively? When we talk about safety, we're talking about all aspects of safety, right? We're talking about physical safety. We're talking about emotional safety. We're talking about, do people feel safe expressing their own opinions? Do people feel safe, expressing opinions about culture, which also feeds into diversity, equity, and inclusion? Do people feel safe to talk about lived experience? And do they feel safe enough to share that they might have lived experience with, with their coworkers, that they feel that they'll be included? So when we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, even I certainly, will say this. We could spend hours and we could build tons of webinars. We could build a whole series of webinars on diversity, equity, and inclusion around organizational health and culture. We just don't have the time to get into it today. But we do want to say, there are tons of resources out there. MCTAC's got a bunch of resources out there. Our friends at the Coalition for Behavioral Health have some resources you can check out. But it should be consistent across organizational hierarchy, and it should be reflective of the communities that you serve. So what does your hierarchy look like? What does your workforce look like? Is your workforce representative of the communities that you serve? Just some kind of food for thought and things to start thinking about, although I'm sure that probably been thinking about this a lot lately anyway.
Yeah, so let me say that, here that, what HR should be taking, on the metaphor for health, HR should be taking the pulse in all these areas. You know, how people are feeling safe, whether they're feeling safe, how people perceive the organization in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, how people feel about the transparency within the organization, how people feel about their supervision, and whether people feel they have the tools to do the job that they've been hired to do. So, you know, HR can this is the kind of data, in addition to, you know, the outcomes data that Daniela was talking about. This is the kind of data that that an HR professional can access in order to be able to assist the organization in being as healthy as it can be. And this is why also the HR person needs to be in an executive position, because they are in many ways the transporters, or the vehicle for getting that information to you know, executive management, so that resources of the organization are you know, allotted in the areas in a targeted way, based on this data that the HR director is able to and is able to get at and analyze.
So before we move on, any questions about this stuff? Or if you want to maybe chat in, is there any function that we may have not mentioned that you think might be important? All right.
Okay.
So Eve, let's get into the next section then. Eve, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So this is the ladder. This is the steps for maintaining a healthy and resilient organizational culture. So, you know, if we want to really get at this and get it in a way that is, you know, near, I don't think there's, I don't want to use the word comprehensive, because there's probably a lot more, but at least these things are things that, you know, come to mind, and things that, you know, can happen fairly readily is, you know, review your employee manual. Is it consistent with your brand? Is it consistent with what your organization sort of says it's about, and what you promise employees, both in your marketing for new employees, you know, your announcements of vacancies, and then, you know, through the process of hiring, recruitment and hiring. So does your employee manual, does it have, for example, does it use the kind of language that would reflect the kind of organization that you are? So if you are an organization that subscribed to a recovery philosophy, to a trauma-informed philosophy, is the language in your manual consistent with the tenets and the principles of those philosophies? Secondly, be very deliberate about developing a plan around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Not only that includes training, but it also, you know, training is fine, but look at your organization, and look at, you know, the positions in the organization, the executive positions in the organization, the board of your organization. Is the board, is your executive team reflective of the service of the communities in which you deliver services? And consider the various definitions of inclusion, you know, in addition to, you know, race, gender, sexual preference, and culture. There's also diversity in educational backgrounds, and also lived experience. So we're looking at, you know, this idea of equity, diversity, and inclusion in a very wide frame. And this is something that I think is important as far as keeping an organization healthy and resilient. And then getting people in the door. There's actually a whole webinar on that ICL has developed, which I recommend that you tune into. But is your workforce, does your workforce have the skills to deliver the services that yield the outcomes that your organization is interested in achieving? And, you know, sometimes, you know, I always say when you hire people, there are things that you want in an employee, which is, you know, kind of the soft skills. You can teach the hard skills, but you want to know where a person is coming from. You want to know where they're, not only where they've worked, but you want to know how they react to things, how they respond to things, what their feelings are about certain things. And so, you know, there's this kind of soft, we're going to get into this in a little bit, but how do you attract people who have the skills that you want them to have? And then how do you conduct at the recruitment phase, at the interview phase, how do you conduct interviews where you get to know whether the person has those skills and the specific targeted skills that are most important to your organization?
All right. So the other thing that we wanted to talk a little bit about is workforce retention strategies. You know, it's a lot more cost effective to spend money on retaining your staff than it is on constantly retraining and hiring new staff. So we think it's really important to have, you know, an actual retention strategy for your organization. And it should include at least these two things of wellness and workforce development. So we were really excited to see there was somebody from an EAP on the phone today or on the computer with us today, because I think that's one way, that's one example of having a wellness strategy, right? Giving your workforce an EAP, someplace they can go to if they should need some sort of assistance. You know, what about your health plans? What kind of health plans can you offer your staff? Physical and behavioral health benefits, and not just, you know, health benefits as far as like health insurance, but what other wellness things can you offer your staff? You know, I've worked in places where we've had, you know, they've kept the building open an extra hour one night a week, and they brought in a yoga person, and so we could all do yoga together, and it was like $5 or something. It wasn't a whole lot of money. And it served two purposes, right? It was sort of like a team building thing where, you know, it built camaraderie amongst the staff, but it was also a way to sort of, you know, release some tension and some stress and de-stress and take care of ourselves a little bit. Done the Weight Watchers thing at work, right? Again, who hasn't done that? I'm sure there's tons of other examples. And actually, while I'm talking about workforce development, the next bullet, why don't you all take a minute to type into the chat box, what are some other examples of things that you've done to help your workforce sort of stay well? I'll give you an example. You know, flex scheduling might be another thing if you can do that, especially nowadays when folks are working more from home, you know, and people have other responsibilities like homeschooling because kids are also at home. You know, what kinds of things can you offer your staff so that they stay well in that regard? So use the chat box, type in some wellness activities if you can think of some. In addition to wellness for retention strategy, we're looking at workforce development. So, you know, we can't stress enough the role of HR as far as, you know, communication and gathering data around skill acquisition and training. So that's definitely one thing that we want to encourage. We also want to encourage opportunities for advancement, you know, really looking at what are people's strengths and how do we use those strengths to really attain an outcome for the organization. So somebody typed in the chat box, Catholic Charities, part of Employee Assistance, Employee Resource Network, which contracts with a person who's available on site and via telephone to ensure that the employee is able to be linked to any resource needed. For example, if a staff is experiencing a housing issue, they'll assist them, and it's solely for employees. Excellent. Yeah, so it's very similar to EAP. Possible scheduling, frequent check-ins. Yep, informal Zoom gatherings. That's right. We've had Zoom lunches, right? The things we used to do in the office space that we've sort of had to replicate in this virtual climate. Offering leaves of absences, Continued connections online as opposed to, and on-site support. Yep, for counseling, with counseling. You know, it's different now, and wellness might look a little different now because we were used to being in an environment where we could just sort of pop into people's offices, ask questions, check on people. And it's a little bit more, I think it takes a little bit more planfulness nowadays, and we need to be more aware of what people are going through and make the decision to sort of say, I need to check in with, and be really mindful of that these days. How do we get feedback? How do we get feedback from our employees? How do we get ideas from our employees? So again, going back to the example of employee annual reviews, right? So annual reviews are good, but it shouldn't be the first time you're giving feedback to someone. Annual reviews shouldn't be the only time where an employee gets to talk about what they think is going on and give them, give their opinions and views on different things. How do you encourage that? Think about how you encourage feedback. Think about how you give feedback and receive feedback and what that loop looks like. And is it something that feels accessible to your employees? And maybe you have to ask your employees straight up, and have a focus group and say, what's working, what's not working. We want to hear from you. We want to get your feedback, and encourage that so that the culture begins to be or continues to be one that encourages that feedback loop.
Yeah, let me add something here, Daniela. I think that in supervision, first of all, how rigorous is supervision, and how flexible is it? And so, a person who starts a job may need supervision more often, and maybe that would be kind of more frequently scheduled. And then somebody who's been on the job for more years may need to have less frequent meetings with their supervisors. So, it's not one size fits all. And it should be also in terms of this tailoring supervision, so that, for some people, it's using supervision to help the person build their skills, to improve their, to add more things to their toolbox. And certainly for others, it could be to generate innovation. If somebody has been on the job for a long time and, has it down, but maybe a person like that also has ideas about how to improve things or how to redesign things so that they can be more efficient. So, this is the role of the supervisor, to kind of figure out what a person needs, and to use supervision as a forum for doing that. In addition, using the supervision platform to get feedback. So to ask often, how are things going? Do you have what you need? And to kind of make it into something that then can become the vehicle for collecting the kind of data where, if enough supervisors kind of report back that many people on the front lines are complaining about not having certain tools, where that can generate through a feedback loop to HR, okay, so I think as an organization, based on this feedback, we need to provide more training in X or Y. So, so the whole thing really has to do with having a way to get information, getting a sense of, how people are doing, and then getting that information, up through the channels that then can result in action that responds to that particular information.
It's almost like HR's role is to really be that link, that liaison between, executive director, deputy director, and line staff and managers, right?
Yes.
A man of very few words today. All right. So the last thing on this slide is around, serving as a filter. So ensuring that internal communication is consistent with organizational culture. So what do we mean by that? So is the language that you're using when you're communicating between staff and among staff, is that consistent with the organization's mission, vision, and values? Is the language recovery-based? Is it person-centered? Just to name a few. If it's not, you might want to consider sort of looking at internal communication and the language that we're using. You know, I always say culture is contagious. So if the language and the mission, vision, and values are not consistent, if the communication is not consistent, there's going to be that disconnect, and there's going to be a little bit of a rockiness in your organization's culture. And everything we're really talking about as far as maintaining a healthy and resilient culture has to do with how you engage your workforce and what you do to engage your workforce. Because really it's all about engagement, right? And we talk about, it's sort of a parallel process for those folks in the room that are more social worky or counselor background. It's really a parallel process because you're doing the same thing with your staff. You're working to engage your staff that the staff are doing to engage people who receive services, right? You're not going to have good outcomes if you don't do a good job with engagement.
I mean, think of this. Have you ever gotten, and this has happened to me, where, you know, I work for an organization that was extremely person-centered and recovery-oriented, and, you know, that was really through and through. But then, you know, you get this this email, you know, or this notice from a department in your organization, and, you know, with us, it was often coming from the fiscal department, you know, around a particular fiscal issue or a particular fiscal policy that was not being followed or whatever. And the tone of that message or the tone of that memo was one where you said, where is this coming from? You know, that's not the way we interact with each other. That's not the way we relate to each other. And so, you know, this isn't, you know, I don't want everybody to think that this is only within kind of the role of service, the folks who deliver services, but it's the folks, all the folks in the organization have to buy into the culture and have to communicate in a way that's reflective of the culture. And sometimes some people are, you know, it's very kind of natural. And so it's important, you know, for someone in the organization, and I think HR is sort of can play that role of ensuring that, you know, to keep the organization healthy and resilient and to keep the culture sort of consistent, that kind of, you know, that the HR person can develop mechanisms for ensuring that when communication does go out, or when especially written communication, that it is consistent with the culture of the organization.
And I'm going to take that just a step further, you know, because you bring up a good point. We're not just talking about frontline staff, you know, the staff that are providing the direct services. We're talking about every layer of staff. We're talking about maintenance staff. We're talking about fiscal staff. We're talking about IT. When we look at training and we talk about training, you know, does everyone have an idea or an understanding of behavioral health? And I'm not saying that everybody, you know, I'm not saying your accountant should be an LCSW, right? But I'm saying that the folks in your fiscal department, just like the folks in your maintenance department, should have an understanding of behavioral health, you know, a small understanding, you know, an entry-level understanding, if you will, of behavioral health. Because at some point, you know, we don't work in bubbles, right? Everybody interacts with each other at some point here or there. And you want to make sure that that culture is consistent across departments in your organization.
Well, everyone in the organization should know what the organization, why it exists. You know, what's its raison d'etre? Why is it, you know, why are we doing what we're doing? And in fact, you know, I think that aspect also engages everyone. Because remember, alignment, everybody in the organization has to be aligned with regard to the organization's objectives, with the organizational goals. And so, you know, you can't have outliers here, because it just messes things up, and it creates a lot of, you know, it creates role confusion. It really creates a lot of obstacles, and it doesn't, maintain the health, and certainly interferes with the resiliency of the organization. So in a
100%.
case like COVID, everybody in the organization had to know all of that in order to respond, and to respond quickly and to respond effectively. You couldn't have some part of the organization not understanding what needed to be done.
That's right. So again, before we move to the next section here, we're going to stop, ask the folks if you have any questions, comments. This is sort of your opportunity to chat some stuff in if you'd like. Otherwise, we're going to move forward. So this next section is around tools and resources, and there are tons of tools and resources that were put together by ICL for this Workforce Priorities series. Actually, we have a couple things. 100% parallel process. Yep, thanks so much. Great. Oh, someone's had to leave. Okay, very good. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so tools and resources. So Workforce Priorities tools and resources are available at ctacny.org. There's an entire page that Tara just put into the chat box that links every single webinar and every single resource. We're not going to be able to get through every one of them today, but we wanted to highlight a few with you. The sample job descriptions and the interview guides are the ones that we're going to look at today. But there are several others, and we do encourage you. It's a great series, and we encourage you to check them out if you haven't participated in them already. All right, so there are 3 interview guides. There's one on integrated health or whole health. There's one on trauma-informed practices, and there's one on person-centeredness and recovery orientation. So we're just going to take a couple minutes to go through a couple of them and chat with you about what they are. So basically, these are 2-page interview guides, and they're questionnaires that not questionnaires, but they're lists of questions in different areas that are available to you for you to use when you're potentially hiring a new employee. And so they're broken down by things like scope of practice, the knowledge and understanding towards either, integrated health or health in general, towards recovery orientation and trauma-informed practices. So Eve, I'm going to let you go for this one because I know integrated health is your thing.
Yeah. So integrated health. So this is about how do you get the right person in the door? Okay. So you put out a job posting, and you may mention integrated health in the job posting as a statement about what your organization does, and you want somebody who understands those principles. So the person is in front of you now, and you're sitting across the table, and you're interviewing them. And these questions are specifically designed to elicit what the person knows about integrated health. Now, the person may not know exactly what you mean by integrated health, but then you want to get at perhaps what their sort of appetite or what their kind of proclivities are in the way they work, and can they buy into the idea of integrated health, whole person health. So if you look at the questions, if you look at the interview questions, they will try to get that information from the person so that you get a better sense of, is this the right person to bring in? I can teach the person a lot about integrated health, but is this person kind of leaning, or is this person interested, or is this person kind of committed to the idea of whole person health in addressing the needs of the people that you serve in your organization? So it's not only trying to get a sense of their knowledge, but it's also about their understanding and their attitudes, and that will help you to make the right decision when you're hiring. And all these interview guides basically try to tap into knowledge, understanding, and attitudes so that you can make the best choice in a hiring decision.
And there's also, just to piggyback on that, there's also a section of potential questions to ask, questions to ask potential new supervisors when you're hiring a supervisor. So we encourage you to take a look at that as well. And these are just some examples of the questions around understanding recovery and person-centered principles and attitudes towards recovery and person-centered care. Describe the likelihood of recovery for people that you've worked with. How is recovery the same or different as treatment? Really getting at, what is this person's understanding of recovery, and what's this person's understanding of, joining a potential client. I like to say walking with them instead of walking ahead of them or behind them. Really sort of being on the same recovery journey together and sharing power.
These are very useful, by the way, and they're also very good because you can use the same questions, which is a very good sort of approach when you're interviewing multiple people. So you get you get a much better way to compare responses when you're asking the same questions. So I would really urge everyone to get a hold of those and to use them. I think it was terrific that ICL put these together.
Absolutely. So again, we're looking to hear from you guys now, folks. How do you think these questions might help you to recruit and hire employees who share your organization's beliefs and practices, whether they're around whole health or being trauma-informed or recovery, being recovery-oriented? How do you think these questions could help you to recruit and hire employees? And Tara, thank you, Tara. Just put the direct link to the interview guide tools in the chat box for you, if you'd like.
Yeah, just another kind of connection here. For those of you who are involved in substance abuse services, I would for one would want to know how a person, what their attitudes, understanding, and beliefs around harm reduction are. And so, if there isn't an interview tool for that, maybe you can create one, using the ones that we have as a model, but to be able to kind of ask questions that elicit that kind of because that's a very clear philosophy of providing services. So this is kind of a little bit of a tutorial on interviewing and how to conduct the best kind of interview that gives you the best kind of information.
So Gail chatted in that these are the questions that they're already using and they're really useful. Marilyn chatted in that it'll reduce turnover if you hire a person who is aligned with your beliefs and mission. Absolutely.
No question about that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so Eve mentioned soft skills earlier. This is sort of another place we thought we would mention it since we're talking about interviewing. Soft skills are another thing that you might want to sort of probe about and ask questions about, sort of looking for the things like collaboration, communication, empathy and compassion, power sharing, which I had mentioned earlier, de-escalation, non-judgmental listening. I think this is a really important one. I mean, they're all really important. But it's a very difficult, I think, skill to have, non-judgmental listening. It's a difficult skill to learn, I should say, but a great skill to have. So listen for these things when you're asking questions on an interview. Ask sort of the experiential questions. We kind of talked about that the other day, Eve and I. Ask people to tell you a story about a time when, tell me a story about a time when you helped someone achieve their goal. What did that look like? How did that feel for you? What was the experience like? Also, tell me about a time where you had a really difficult time working with someone. What kind of obstacles did you face? Did you overcome them? How did you overcome them? Sort of ask about stories. We think that's important.
You mentioned this the last time around, scenario-based questions.
Mm-hmm.
People situations, so for example, if a person can't come up with a story, in an interview, the person may be nervous, and I think we have to be compassionate about interview anxiety. But I think that you can also give people scenarios and saying, so here's a situation, how would you respond to it? And then you see, around these soft skills where the person, where they land in terms of collaboration, communication, empathy, compassion, power sharing, and so on. And you can ask questions specifically to that. So it's just to get you, closer to what you're looking for, and then not to waste time. And as somebody said, not to kind of make a bad decision that ends up, bad decisions in hiring cost a lot of money. No. Okay.
The other thing that we should mention, and we talked about this in a previous webinar, Tara just reminded me, thank you, Tara, for being such a good listener, was, asking about people's ability to provide services virtually, especially in this landscape. So we're not just looking at, the skills that are specific to providing a service, and we're not just looking at the soft skills, but we're also looking at, sort of like, what are the technology skills that this individual might have? And what do we need to teach them in order to be able to provide services in a virtual landscape? See, anybody want to add anything to this? Actually, we have the next slide is really a question for you guys. Is how do you think the workforce's soft skills would contribute to the organization's culture? So things like collaboration, communication, empathy, de-escalation, what else? Listening, non-judgmental listening. How do those things contribute to the organization's culture? Let's take a minute to use the chat box, or again, you can unmute yourselves if you can and if you like. But please go ahead and answer that question for us. Well, think about this. If you don't feel comfortable answering the question, think about the question.
Can you go back to the slide, Daniela, the previous slide? So that
the soft skills slide, yeah.
Yeah.
So think about how all of these.
Okay, we got one. We got one. Our industry is based on empathy. Our staff must exhibit this trait.
Yeah.
That's right.
They should. They absolutely should.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What else? Anybody else? Thank you for that. So while people are thinking, I just want to remind everyone, when we were talking about safety before, and we were talking about, organizational health and safety being a measure of organizational health, all of these elements also are consistent with what a safe environment feels like. So when we're talking about culture and we're talking about safety in the culture, we want to bring people into the organization. And so when we interview people, we want to make sure that they will fit into the culture because they're moving into a culture. Here, somebody said, agency success is only possible if the workplace is safe and welcoming to both clients and staff. Soft skills are very important for the culture. If a supervisor has poor soft skill, the message, and then it cut off. Let me see.
Yeah, the message can be lost.
Yes.
The message can be lost.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I think that, they're nice summary statements for this because, clearly you've got it in terms of how you're operating. Here we have, they contribute tremendously because if you don't have them, the job itself is nearly impossible. You can teach people how to document notes, but empathy and compassion is different, and the employees should possess them. Yeah.
Eve, we should also talk about burnout too. I mean, when we talk about employee wellness and staff wellness, I think it's important to talk about burnout because all of these soft skills sort of contribute to managing burnout and dealing with burnout. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, there's something out there called compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue is what happens when the organization is not listening to the experience of the employees, and the employees are dealing on a daily basis with the sort of stressors and the distress of other people that clearly our organizations exist in order to help people kind of navigate and be able to find paths to healing and recovery. And so being in there and being present and being real exposes the employee to all sorts of, secondary traumatic stress, as it's also known. So, you know, an organizational culture and an organization's health, and again, getting back to the parallel process, is that the organization internally needs to operate with a sensitivity to.
Oh, I think we lost Eve again. All right, so let's move on to the last section, which is around job descriptions. So we think it's important to talk about job descriptions because this is how you're recruiting, right? This is how you're bringing folks into the door. This is your message to your potential workforce about what it is you're offering them. And so we think it's important to talk about job descriptions because of that. So a couple of things that we think it's important to include in order to sort of attract the right person that you might be looking for.
Okay, I froze. So, I'm back. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We moved on to job descriptions.
Yeah, I think you got the gist.
Yeah. So the first is the sort of overall organization overview. So what is it, a direct or indirect statement that really highlights what your organization is all about? What are the organization's recovery principles? And then in addition to the overview of the organization, the next part should really be about the job responsibility. So making sure that what you're advertising in your recruitment materials align with the job that the person is going to be doing, as well as aligning with the organization's mission, vision, and values. So there's that consistency there. And we think it's important to use words that are person-centered and recovery-oriented, that reinforce that the person receiving the service is really the expert here and they're driving the services, not the clinician or the person providing the service.
Keep in mind also, just a second, because I want to say something about the job description, and I believe that we got a message from Tara talking about working virtually. So how many of you would you say in your job descriptions I'm sure they haven't been updated to include ability to work virtually. No. So it's a good idea just to revisit your job descriptions every once in a while and to see that they are consistent with what your organization is really about.
It's true, because I think most of the time we only update job descriptions when someone leaves and we have to refill that position, right?
Right.
Right. So some examples of some job responsibilities that were put together, and those are also in one of the ICL resources. Work together with clients to help them develop coping skills that will help them manage trauma triggers more effectively. Minimum 3 years experience working with people using a recovery perspective. And some examples of that language would be partner with individuals to develop skills to help manage strong emotions and familiarity with strategies to manage chronic illnesses such as diabetes and hypertension. So the point here is that by stating things like partner with individuals, you're looking for someone with a recovery orientation, right, that has a background in recovery. By using words like familiarity with strategies to manage chronic illnesses, you're looking for someone who believes in integrated health, right? And we're not looking for, a medical doctor or a nurse practitioner, but we're looking for someone that has an idea about diabetes, and if they don't have an idea about diabetes and hypertension, that they're able to connect with people that do and partner with people to ensure that that whole health aspect takes place.
So let me tell you something that I used to do with job descriptions. I'd review them when I'd hire somebody, and when I'd first start supervising them, I'd review the job description with them, and I would say, look, this job description has all these bullets on it. Let's go over each one and let's rate from 1 to 10, which ones you think you've got down and which ones you think you're going to need some assistance with learning. And so in some way, use the job description to do an assessment so that you know what this person is going to need and how you can best provide them with either, the direct supervision, whether you can recommend them for training or whether you can give them resources to develop those skills. But what we're doing here is we want there to be a consistency between what the job description says, what you're going to relate to when you do your performance evaluation based on that job description, and how that job description is going to guide how you're going to deliver supervision and how you're going to connect the person to resources to develop or improve the skills that they need in order to do their jobs effectively.
So the key takeaway here, there's a couple of key takeaways. So language is really important, but also making sure that the position you're hiring for is the job you're posting for, right? So making sure that the language is reflective of the mission, vision, values of your organization, and the job that you're hiring to do, which is basically the second bullet point here. So our last chat question, I know you're all relieved you can get rid of us soon, but our last chat question, think about, we hope that you've used this time to sort of start thinking about your organization's culture, if you haven't already, to start thinking about sort of priority areas or things you might want to address, and even to start thinking about how you might leverage some of your assets, some of your really, the strengths that you have in your organization's culture, and leverage those to sort of beef up the areas that maybe need a little bit more help. So if you feel comfortable, we're curious to know sort of what you got out of today. Is there something that you think might be a priority for your organization? And while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to pull up the next slide. So there are still a couple of offerings left in the Workforce Priorities series. So we have something on October 1st coming up with ICL about employee engagement, which of course, we think is super important. So we encourage you to register for that. And then the pre-employment screening tool package will also be available in mid-October. So hopefully you'll log on. Tara put in the chat box earlier the link to the webinar series. There's a whole page on the MCTAC website. So we encourage you to log on to that and watch those pre-recorded webinars and get some more information out of there, as well as some resources.
We have a chat from Andy, I think,
Yep.
who says, confirm staff comfort levels in working from home. Yeah, in terms of that virtual technology, time management, and job descriptions. And Andy, you're so right, because really the assumption that everybody is comfortable with virtual service delivery is off. And I think that we have to figure out how we can assist people in becoming comfortable with this form of service delivery.
Absolutely. And it's not just about making sure that, the folks that you're providing services to are comfort in receiving have comfort in receiving services, or are comfortable, I can't talk today, are comfortable in receiving services virtually, but it's also that your workforce is comfortable providing services virtually. And what can you do to provide training for them?
Yeah, and one other thing that I forgot to mention earlier, in terms of that alignment sort of theme, that when we think about a workforce and we think about an individual, that people have their own reasons for doing this work. And I think that we need to tap into that, as well as the organization's reasons for, it's sort of a two-way street. It's not only that we want the employee to kind of buy into the organizational kind of philosophy or thinking, but we also, as an organization, in order to engage and also keeping talent, which is also a whole other priority, because talent is hard to come by, but we want to be able to tap into what's important to the employee and how the organization can sort of support that and help that employee feel that their kind of reasons for doing this work are being mirrored in how the organization operates and how the organization develops them as individuals. So so keep that sort of reciprocity. You know, we talked about parallel, but there's also a reciprocity that is important here. Daniela, you aren't muted.
Oh, I thought I was. Pardon. Okay, so I got a message saying that I was. Zoom is doing bizarre things today. So we put up the resource page, again, the workforce priorities, how to attract, hire, and retain the right people for today's behavioral health world. That's all available for you on MCTAC.org. The organizational culture assessment questionnaire that we referenced early on in the meeting today, that's available for you by using that link. And this is sort of the end of our presentation. Again, if you have any questions, comments, this is sort of your chance. I think we've caught everything. Okay, good.
So we want to thank everyone. Yeah, Daniela, thank you very much for co-hosting. And Tara, thank you very much for backup and for your support.
And we hope all of you, we're really glad that you're all able to join us today. Hopefully you can take something away and bring that back to your organization and start working on keeping a resilient organizational culture if you haven't already started doing so. All right, have a great day, everyone. Be well, stay well.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you soon.